We were told it's an absolute.
Okay.
You just don't do it.
So where would they put you up during the night then, as you're going forward? Were you still taking over buildings, or sleeping out in the open?
If we could, otherwise we'd get on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I've often said some of the best night's sleep I've ever had was followed in the morning by brushing snow off the top of my bedding roll. But we slept in our clothes, took our boots off, but kept the boots in the bedding roll.
Now, what did Germany look like to you as you were going through it? I mean, did you see a lot of bomb damage or things like that, or was it mostly open country? Or
we didn't get it to any of the big cities, except we got in sight of Koblenz when all up the Moselle. A lot of little cities that there wasn't much left. I didn't really get a good view of Koblenz. I did see where the Remagen Bridge was. There was a division on our left, and one of the pilots from the 4th Armored had said he thought the bridge was intact, and he called back, only having 2 people to talk to, called back, we sent it back, and when it got to division headquarters, they sent it to the 9th Armored, and they made a run for the bridge and made it. And I was there after the war.
Now, at some point, I think you had mentioned earlier that you had, at one point in this process, seen one of the death camps. Was that on the advance across Germany, or did you see it after the war was over?
April 4th.
Okay.
The war was not over.
Nope.
And I was flying, I suppose, back from a mission, and I saw a bunch of people, hundreds and hundreds of, maybe not that, 100 people, maybe. And I couldn't figure out what they were, and they were all in an enclosure of some kind. So I landed on the road, which was just a country road, ruts, alongside, which you could do in a car. And I walked over and saw it was Camp Ohrdruf, Ohrdruf, of which there's a very great website, by the way. And walked in, and it was certainly within the first hour or so of the Germans abandoning it, and the elements of the 4th Armored walking in.
So were there some of your own unit already there?
Yeah. There were. So I say, I don't know what. Certainly it wasn't number 1, but I was in the first group, first hour, and there were bodies laying over, and some of the photographs that you see in the various museums, like in Washington, and it was several days later before Eisenhower and Patton and Bradley got to visit that, but it was saying apparently people had not moved the bodies. I don't know whether they kept them there for the photographic effect or not, but my unit took pictures of that, and the bodies were exactly the same.
And did you see any survivors there too?
Yeah, they brought, survivors, yeah, there were some alive, yeah. I remember some were in pretty good shape, but some of them, I heard from the medics, were just beyond help, and they tried to give them IVs and all that sort of thing, and they just went on and died. There were some, but there were dead bodies laying all over. Just their method of getting rid of bodies was railroad ties, layer of bodies with railroad ties, and that doesn't get rid of the bones, of course.
Now, before you had gotten there, did you have much of an idea of what the Germans had been doing, or that this sort of thing was going on?
We had heard of the death camps and wrote it off as, oh, nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, no human being would do that sort of thing to another human being, kill millions of Jews. And I didn't know until after the war, sometime after the war, that the Russians had run into a death camp almost a year before Ordruff.
Yeah.
And we were never told what to expect.
There had been a lot of camps in sort of what had been sort of Poland and places like that. And as the Russians got in there, the Germans tried to evacuate them or cover up, but they didn't always do a very good job. Yeah, but the full publicity for that kind of thing wasn't really out yet.
Ordruff was a relatively small gang. It was only, I think, somebody said there was only 4,000 had been killed there, which made it a relatively small extermination point.
But they also had a lot of camps that were essentially prison camps where they
Oh,
let
yeah.
them die rather than
Yeah.
finished them all off at
Or
once,
they
too.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
work them till they're dead, that's all.
Right. Now, was that the only time you had to encounter that sort of thing, or did you see more of it as you went on?
No, the war was over. That was April, early April. I think it was the 4th. And the war was over the 8th of May. And I spent a couple hours or more flying up and down the refugees trying to get behind American lines, dropping leaflets, which had to have been printed a while back.
So the idea was you were trying to help refugees get away from the Soviets
Yeah,
and into
that's what they
American
promised. I
help.
wish I had brought one home. It'd be a great souvenir. That will be of all the help we can, etc.
Right.
And then they had the party for me and the colonel who was number 2 in points. And that was the end. I drank too much. I woke up in a car some 100 miles or so on the way to Le Havre. And so that's my story.
Well, that still gets us kind of only to the middle of 1945. And you said you're not discharged officially until early in 46. So what did you do then after that?
Well, the Army thought I was going to go home and be discharged. But I thought, and I don't know, remember whether I decided on the way back or what, but for some reason I didn't feel comfortable getting out until the war was over. So I went to Chicago for the assignment and asked for go back to Fort Sill and do some teaching. I could have gone west, but I elected not to.
West as in Pacific West, or just
Yeah.
And
Well, for one thing, as far as we know, the L4s were not very useful in this island warfare thing. So, I was right in saying that I was, by then, a very good pilot. So I went back and asked if I could go to Fort Sill and teach. And after they sent me down there, and the chief pilot, whose name I still can remember, took me for a ride, and he remembered me from my student days. And I landed, and he said, I would be absolutely delighted to have you as an instructor. And then, I don't remember just when it was, because the getting out was so much terminal leave. And they compute terminal leave, and then they figure out how much terminal leave you'd accumulated on that. But I finally told the people in charge of Fort Sill that I thought it was time I became a captain.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the senior pilots, I was being administrative officers, went to Washington, flew up there, and came back and said, no promotions here now.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, goodbye. The war was over. I wanted to go to school.
And then is that what you did?
That's exactly what I did.
All right. And then what kind of academic training then did you get?
Well, I went to Wayne University and then went to medical school there.
Mm-hmm. And then what field of medicine did you go into?
Did 13 years of being a real doctor.
Mm-hmm.
General practice
Mm-hmm.
up in Boyne City, if you know where Boyne
Mm-hmm.
City is. And then decided that I'd always, because we had such a strong chief of psychiatry at Wayne, that I really wanted to go into psychiatry. I moved myself and my family down to Traverse City and took the residency there, and
Mm-hmm.
ended up as the director of the adult services, which is no kids and no very old people.
Mm-hmm.
And then I retired and they closed the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Within, it really was months, and
Mm-hmm.
my superintendent had told me when I decided to retire, I had met Karen, we were not married. I do have 6 kids, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
5 are still alive. And that I was going to retire, and his response was, oh my God, you're the only other board-certified doctor here.
Mm-hmm.
They'll close us. I knew, don't be silly. So I retired in January. He retired in April, and they closed the hospital in May or June.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Are there other miscellaneous things that kind of stick in your mind about your period in the service that you haven't gotten into this account yet? There will be after I turn off the camera.
Oh, of course. One of my very dear friends, are you near the end of the tape? No. Okay. One of my very dear friends in Houston, after Karen and I were married, by the way, we will have our 25th anniversary very shortly. He and I used to see each other fairly often. He had been the executive officer of the battalion. And we were talking about the war one time, which we rarely did. And one night he said, you know, when we were kids and we used to see the movies about First World War and how the units stuck together
Mm-hmm.
and friends and all that sort of thing. He said, you know what? There's no other bond in this world like 2 people who have been shot at.
Mm-hmm.
And survived it. And I certainly believe that's true. That was I had troubles afterwards. I had what would now be post-traumatic stress disorder,
Mm-hmm.
mild. And that's been going on quite a while, but it took. I was jumpy.
Mm-hmm.
In those days, we didn't do anything about it. We just,
No.
it'll go away.
You'd also mentioned, this is a little bit different, I think you'd mentioned before the interview that you were involved on the board of was it a Holocaust Museum or something like that in Houston?
Yeah.
Okay, could you tell us just a little bit about that and how you got to be involved with that?
Yeah, Karen and I both practiced in Houston. And I had decided, although I had retired from Traverse, I wanted to do psychotherapy rather than do hospital psychiatry and that sort of thing. So I limited my practice to psychotherapy. It was very very pleasant. We did 12 years, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And one day Karen said, I have a lady here that was a prisoner at one of the camps. Would you like to talk to her? Because I've asked her, and she said, yeah, she'd like to talk to me. So she did, and the Holocaust Museum in Houston was in the early days of formation, and she talked to me, and she talked to what board there was, and I got an invitation to be on the board, so I was on the board while we were building it. Matter of fact, my name was on the brass placards out in front of that, and that was quite an experience too, because there were many survivors on that board. Here are some of the stories. Many of them would say that they never had spoken about anything about it until they ran across that group of people. I took an employee of mine when I was in Traverse City, and he came to me. He was chief steward, and he said, were you in one of the camps? I said, yeah. He said, which one? I said, Ordruff. And he said, okay, you wouldn't know about Ordruff unless you'd been there. Because this was, he says, can I talk to you? I said, well, of course. And Henry and I met about an hour a week for 6 months or so, and I heard some of the most terrible stories. He was in Buchenwald for, I don't know, 6 months, something like that. His wife finally bribed him out of there. Literally, the chief Jew from town had gone out and told the commander, he said, if you don't let him out, you're not going to get any cooperation from any of us in town. So, but anyhow, that was probably the thing I remember most about the war.
Now, to look back on the whole thing now, I mean, how do you think your experience, your time in the military sort of affected you as a person? Either how you look at the world or just anything else?
My book is dedicated, it says, to Karen, who asked the question. And shortly after she was married, she heard me, or we were married, she heard me say something about the war. And finally she said, how did the war affect you? And I said, I'm not sure, but I'll make some notes. And I started making notes, and notes begot notes begot notes. And yeah, it did affect me. I think it could not have affected me. I was losing my naivete, for one thing. Hard to remember that in all the armed services, only like 2% ever get shot at, and have that part of it. When you talk to a veteran, I have a grandson who just got back from Iraq, and he and I are the family veterans. I come from a family of veterans. My grandfather's brother, my father, me, my brother, my nephew, and now one grandson has spent time in service. And we're all proud of it. On special days, we email each other and say, good for us. We're not pacifists at all. My first thought is, let's nuke them, but I know better than that. And I would not if I could not. But you find out what people are capable of. It's a hard lesson. I don't think I ended up paranoid like a lot of people did. Suspicious of everything. I swore when I got back to this country that I would never, under any circumstance, set foot on German soil. But when my son commanded a battalion over there, we went over and visited him. It was all very friendly, with lots of Germans that were friendly. And the whole thing was, I thought it was put on at the time, but I've since become convinced that the Germans hate World War II. Not that they lost it, but it was just a catastrophe all around. That, it's against the law to display the swastika. And we went over there 3 times, as Mike would do a tour. And I think the Germans have handled post-World War II better than many countries have.
Yeah, well, I mean, the government as a whole did a lot to try to eventually acknowledge and recognize what had happened and make sure that the people themselves understood it in ways that the Japanese probably didn't do as systematically. And there's sort of more issues still with what the Japanese government will or will not own up to, as opposed to where the Germans are now. And you get current generation of Germans who've grown up afterward, they find a lot of it pretty horrifying too.
Yeah.
So they did manage to do that. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Delighted. This will go into the archives here with a copy to
Yes, it will.
Washington.
Yeah. But the way it works is...
I'm absolutely astonished. I've talked about the war, and to my generations, there's only one more. I've given talks about it. I've written about it. I have many, many, many hours of tapes I've taped off the air off. And I usually talk without much emotion, but this interview, whether it's the fact that it's gone on for a while or some of the things just came back, I'm anxious, my heart's going fast. But the amazing thing is that has been over for 63 years. 63 years. Isn't that something?
Well, part of why we do this, I think, is because we recognize on some level that as a human experience, this was extreme and an uncliched version of that word. Something that most people never have to go through, and we don't want to put more people through. But in the meantime, if you live with that, then you carry that with you. And it certainly has happened plenty of times as I've had this kind of interview, where people, they do start to put it together, and there is still that, it's still very fresh in certain ways in people's minds. It's still, oh my God, I went through that, or saw that, or they don't even always know why.
It's almost like I'm going through it.
Yeah. So you're not alone in that experience.
No, I'm sure I'm not. I should know enough about human behavior and emotions since I made my living at it for quite a while.
Well, so that more interesting a comment coming from you then.
And I thank you, Dr.
All right.
Smithers. What did you say your first name was?